Joey Labus versus Deuce Hogan. It's a possibility, folks. This Saturday in the Music City Bowl, we sit down with Coach Don Patterson to discuss the Music City Bowl, Iowa and Kentucky, what the Hawkeyes need to do to be victorious, and what Don's looking for in this game, what he's watching for, the players he's watching for to possibly emerge, guys who finally have an opportunity to shine in a big setting. We'll talk about it with Coach Don Patterson. This is week 209 of Brada's Branded Thoughts, and this is from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Hawkeye fans, let's talk about health and performance optimization for a moment. Our sponsor, Ascent Nutrition, offers amazing products. It's actually owned by former Iowa graduate Lance Shuttler. Now, I've decided to partner with Ascent Nutrition because of their unique approach to human health. Ascent offers an organically grown, mold and mycotoxin-free coffee. It provides a pure, clean, and rich flavor without those pesticides that most coffees are treated with. They also offer an algae oil DHA, which is used to support brain health, memory, and focus, as well as proper nervous system development in adults, children, athletes, and even pets. Now, lastly, their unique crafted wild pine pollen is used to support cardiovascular health, hormonal function, and a healthy libido. Your purchase not only supports this channel, but the business of a former Hawkeye. Visit goascentnutrition.com or click the link in the description below and use the code Hawkeyes. That's the code Hawkeyes to receive 15% off your total order from Ascent Nutrition. Pleased to be joined now by former Iowa assistant coach Don Patterson. We're here talking about Iowa and Kentucky for the second straight year, Don, in the Music City Bowl, and it's been a while since we've had you on the show. Appreciate you taking the time. I believe the last time we actually spoke with you here formally was after the Nebraska game. A lot has happened. We're going to talk briefly. We got about an hour here today that we're going to talk about Iowa, Kentucky in the bowl game, so I don't want to steal time from that. But a lot has occurred as it relates to the transfer portal, NIL stuff. I mean, the portal scene in general is just chaotic right now. We got bowl games already occurring. I want to start, though, before we get to substance and Iowa, Kentucky, your thoughts on the situation for Iowa at quarterback upcoming. We're talking the Cade McNamara situation, adding Cade from Michigan, and, of course, Eric All, his buddy at tight end. Obviously, two huge gets. Just your thoughts on those guys joining the black and gold next year.
Well, I've been very impressed with what I've seen of Cade. He reminds me a lot of a guy that good Iowa fans are very familiar with, and that would be Jim Hartland. Jim was an outstanding quarterback. Anybody that doesn't remember that simply didn't follow Iowa football very closely in the early 90s. We had a quarterback that played ahead of Jim for Jim's sophomore and junior years. That would be Matt Rogers, who was a two-time first-team All-Big Ten quarterback. He was the player of the year, offensive player of the year in 1990, as I recall. But when 92 rolled around, I wasn't too concerned about it because we still had Jim Hartland. Incidentally, Jim Hartland finished his career with a quarterback rating of 134.1. And just to set the record straight, the highest that Spencer ever had these past 3 years was 119, as I recall. And 134.1 from a career standpoint puts him one spot ahead of Nate Stanley and one spot behind Drew Tate. So I would say Jim Hartland's in pretty good company. The reason I bring it up that way is Cade McNamara reminds me a lot of Jim. Above average as a runner, very, very smart, very poised. Doesn't have a cannon for an arm, but does throw with good accuracy. I see all those things in McNamara. And on top of all that, I see an outstanding leader too. So I think he'll do a good job for us. I don't doubt that for a second. And I do think that with all coming in, we have a chance to have as good a 1-2 punch at tight end as we've ever had. And that's a lot to ask, of course, because we've had a lot of good combinations at tight end. We have a good combination this year at tight end with our two best. So that tradition will continue, a tradition of great tight end play.
An area that I disagree with from a fan's, I heard a lot of fans this past month say that, and most of them Michigan fans, that maybe we're overhyping McNamara with his feet. And yes, Iowa fans are used to. I mean, we've had 3 straight years of Iowa's starting QB being completely immobile. I mean, I hate to say that about Spencer, but that's just the reality of his game. I watch Cade, and I do see a guy who's above average with his feet. Maybe, when you're comparing him to the general consensus of college football 2022. Maybe that's not the case, but you're comparing him to Jim, and you think both guys were above average on the ground.
Yes, absolutely.
So Eric All is an interesting one. I have heard some people make the comment that Sam Laporte, I mean, obviously adding Eric All is terrific. Don't get me wrong. And him and Lachey, you assume Lachey is going to take another step in his development next year, Don. But people heading into this year, and I'd say people, some in the media, some in the fan base, were hyping the Laporta-Lachey tandem as the next Fant-Hawkinson duo. And I understand that's just kind of the reality of how fans are going to hype things up. Let's not overhype Eric Hall, because you're also losing one of the greatest tight ends to ever play here. I mean, stat-wise, Don, Sam Laporta is one of the greatest to ever do it in an Iowa uniform. So I'm excited about all, but unless the quarterback position is improved, and I believe it will be with Cade McNamara, unless the offense has improved from a play calling and design standpoint, which I think the verdict is very much out still on that notion, I'm going to pull the reins back on the idea that this is going to be another Fant and Hawkinson type of year. But that's, of course, the narrative out there.
Let's not forget the fact that both those players from Michigan have had surgeries. Yes. And it sounds like the surgeries went just fine, but there's always the possibility that the rehab won't go as well as what people first thought. I hope that's not the case. I have reason to believe that they're both going to be fine. I do not know for sure that McNamara is going to play in the spring. I think All has a better chance to play in the spring than McNamara does, for what I know.
I know when All committed here a few weeks ago, I called you and I asked you, are you concerned with the fact that Eric All just had back surgery? And you actually said no. I mean, you just weren't that concerned. So back surgery is not one that you believe to be a real – it's not something that you're afraid of necessarily causing lingering issues down the road in a guy's career?
I'm more worried about knee surgery on the part of McNamara. But I think there have been assurances from both players that they're going to be just fine. I know All was actually quoted as saying, tell the fans not to worry about my back surgery. He said, I'm going to be back better than ever. It was a minor surgery, as he described it, and that I think that's another reason to be more concerned about Cade's rehab, because the knee might require him to miss spring ball. That's entirely possible. Hope not. That's one argument maybe for backing up spring ball a week or two, just to be able to get him out there a little more than what he otherwise would be.
Well, Don, I want to thank you, because that extends a great segue to our discussion for this evening, and that is the Iowa-Kentucky Music City Bowl. We can talk about the matchup. I've made very clear, and we're not thrilled about this matchup, the fact that you just played Kentucky last year. There were a lot of great storylines last year, Don, with the Mark Stoops Iowa connection. I understand that. And now Mike Stoops is also a part of the staff. That is a different change from last year. He was not part of that staff during the game last year. Deuce Hogan's also a part of the team. There's the connection there. But in large part, these are two teams with struggling offenses. Both teams have suffered attrition via the transfer portal during this 3 to 4 week period after the regular season finished. But you mentioned quarterback, and that's kind of the theme, rightfully so, of this game, because both teams are going to be without their starting quarterbacks. Will Levis declaring for the draft, going to be opting out of the bowl game. I know you don't love that as a coach, Don. I think it's probably the right decision from a business standpoint for a guy who's going to be a high first-round draft pick, and Will Levis. Spencer Petras is out. Alex Padilla entering the transfer portal, of course. So this game on December 31st could be massive as it relates to creating depth, or at least getting an inkling for what type of depth will Iowa have at the quarterback position. You're one snap away, as you know, Don, one bad roll-up or injury, I hate to even go there, with Cade McNamara away from, hey, who do we have at backup? It could be a guy like Joey Labus who's going to see the start against Kentucky. Just your thoughts on this very, very unique situation with only two quarterbacks on scholarship entering the bowl game.
Well, I said a while back in time, Corey, it wouldn't surprise me if we were the first team in college football history to be starting a bowl game with a quarterback that never taken a snap in a game. You think about it, what are the odds of that happening? The odds are slim and none. And yet here we are with a starting quarterback that's never taken a snap. I'll remind you, it didn't have to be that way. At the very least, we had a game that would have been ideal to get three quarterbacks playing time, and that would have been the Nevada game with all the weather delays. it would have been easy to give Labus some snaps in that particular game. And of course, you could argue that he could have gotten snaps in a few other games too. But the truth of it is, he hadn't been on the field yet. That's a concern. Let's face it; all of his time has been spent as a scout team quarterback up until now. Incidentally, that presents a problem going into the game too. One thing you want to have out of your scout team, of course, is a good effort on their part to imitate Kentucky's offense. Well, obviously, if our third and fourth quarterbacks are now 1 and 2 in preparation for the game, then the obvious question is who's taking snaps as a scout team quarterback? I don't know. It might be somebody that was a high school quarterback that is not even on the roster as a quarterback. You suspected a guy named Hartley might be that, because if he's at all like his uncle, or two uncles, I should say, Jim and Chuck, then he would certainly qualify as a good. So I don't know what's happening with the scout team performance, but I got to believe it's suffering a little bit because we simply don't have scholarship quarterbacks running the show.
Yeah, and if anybody's not familiar with Thomas Hartley, of course, he went to school up in Madison. He's a guy who I believe lettered. I know he was he played at 2 or 3 different positions in high school, but quarterback was one of them. He was a pretty good quarterback. He's undersized at 5'11", but that's an interesting one. That wasn't asked of Kirk Ferentz during his recent media availability. I wish that had been over Zoom. I would have asked him the question. It's an intriguing one. Carson May is a guy who was a 4-star at one time, according to some recruiting sites. He's obviously very different than Joey Labus, although I think he's, from what I've been told, he's quite a bit more mobile than even Spencer Petras, maybe as mobile as Alex Padilla, which is kind of intriguing given Carson May's size at 6'4", 6'5". Obviously, he's not had a ton of time to learn this offense. He just got here in the summer. You have been an advocate in the past of playing a couple different quarterbacks. And to me, Don, this is a perfect opportunity to do that. You have the potential to get a firm idea as to who your backup quarterback is going to be in 2022. And maybe your starting quarterback in the spring if McNamara is not ready. How do you, if you were in this position, if you were in the position of Brian Ferentz, in the position of Kirk Ferentz, how do you balance trying to get Carson May some experience to evaluate him in a real game and yet still going with who you think is the best, who appears to be Joey Labus at this point?
Well, that's a good argument for playing both quarterbacks in the game on Saturday. Let's face it, neither one of them has shown what they can do in a college game. Wouldn't it be logical that you might give Carson a chance to show what he can do too, even if it was limited snaps? And we think back to the Purdue game, of course, a year ago, in which they played 3 quarterbacks against us, and there's no doubt that all 3 of them knew they were going to play. Second and third quarterbacks, of course, had a very limited number of plays they were going to run, and I'm sure they had a great idea of which plays those were going to be. And you could do the same thing, certainly, with Carson. You could simply be sure he's up to snuff on these particular plays, and those would be the plays that would utilize his strength, whatever they might perceive that to be. Obviously, I think some people would suggest maybe he's a better downfield thrower. I don't know that that's how they feel, because maybe Joe Labus is even better than Carson with downfield throws. I don't know. But it'd be nice if we could find out on Saturday. I'll say that. Let's play them both and have an idea of how they can both perform when the bullets are flying, as we say.
I can say this, and I want to talk about the opt-out transfer portal situation for both these teams. Some are, of course, widely known, but just how this factors into what we should expect on Saturday, Don. But I can tell you this. I received some information here a few days ago on the offense in bowl prep, and it sounds like there are some growing pains occurring, to say the least, which is not a surprise, I don't think, to anyone. I'm disappointed in the same thing you're disappointed in, the fact that Iowa didn't make a concerted effort to give a guy like Joey Labus some time in the regular season. And frankly, they never even gave an opportunity to Alex Padilla until he was absolutely needed. I mean, he never even got a snap against Nevada. So that's disappointing. And so there are going to be growing pains. And I was told here a few days ago that there were some struggles at that position. There have been some struggles here during bowl prep. But he is very good on the run. I mean, that's what this individual informed me of, that, look, the hype is real about him on the ground. He is a different cat than Spencer Petras. And it sounds like he's been doing a lot of scrambling in practice, I think for two reasons. A, he's really good at it. And B, I don't think he's had a choice because he's not probably seeing things at the speed that you need to be able to at this level. He's not going to see things as quickly as Alex Padilla or Spencer Petras would. How do you game plan from an offensive coordinator standpoint?
Well, you can game plan more movement passes than normal. Even when it's in there playing, we routinely run naked, as you know, or maybe a protected naked where we're securing the edge of the formation. So we're going to fake going one way and roll the other way. Typically, we fake left and roll right because we have a right-handed quarterback. I'm sure that's going to be part of the game plan, is to run naked with as I used to call him. Now I understand he's Joe. Maybe that sounds better if your starting quarterback has a more mature sounding name like Joe. But there are other movement passes that we can run. You can move the pocket and give a guy a chance to throw more passes on the run. Even with Spencer, one of the things we tried to do with Spencer is to in the shotgun to take snaps and simply sprint. We refer to it as a sprint pass. The truth of it is it's just a roll pass. You're running under control to the perimeter of the defense, trying to make those outside throws with accuracy. And we just had pretty modest success with them, honestly. Didn't work great for us. Maybe Joey's a better thrower on the move than Spencer. If that's the case, then that'd be logical that we would run some sprint passes.
From what I've been told, Don, that's absolutely the case. That Labus is his best quality, his best trait. He's got a bigger arm than most guys, and he's got the ability to throw on the run, perhaps a significantly better than Spencer Petras. Doesn't mean he's going to outpace Spencer, but as it relates to going out of the pocket, throwing, running, he's certainly a heavy notch ahead. Yeah,
let me address this aspect of the game. Put yourself in the shoes of the defensive coordinator at Kentucky. Knowing that Labus hasn't played a lot, is it hard to imagine that one part of the plan would be to simply try to overwhelm him with pressure? Yeah. It'd be kind of hard to imagine why would they want to just be really vanilla with their defense and give him a chance to be comfortable? You would think they would start the game with the idea, we're going to try to overwhelm this young guy. Hadn't played a lot already. Let's see if we can heat him up and pressure him into mistakes early on in the game. One thing I would be shocked to see if they didn't do is in obvious passing situations, really take some pains to be sure that we can keep him in the pocket. Don't make it easy for him to escape the pocket, because now you eliminate those sprint passes if you got enough pressure off of a wide front to get people up the field to be able to pull up that quarterback if he's on the move with a roll pass or with a naked, either one. You're not going to see many of those plays called in obvious passing situations, because I don't think they're going to let us just be able to get on the edge of the formation with that resistance on their part.
Don, let's transition. We'll come back to quarterback, I'm sure, but let's transition a bit to the depth chart / roster. We've had some movement there with the portal and with NIL and guys opting out. I mentioned Will Levis for Kentucky. Their star running back, Rodriguez, he's also out for the bowl game. Kayvon Merriweather for the Hawkeyes, sitting out, preparing for the NFL draft. You admire, I certainly have a lot of respect for Kayvon Merriweather, but you also admire guys like Jack Campbell, Sam Laporta, guys who will be drafted in a few months for playing in this game and potentially making a big difference. Just talk a bit about those guys deciding to play, and while they're risking injury, sticking it out with their guys.
Well, let's face it, in terms of opt-out and the effect of opt-out on the game, it's safe to say that we absolutely won that already. Kentucky's going to miss Will Levis. They're going to miss a 1,000-yard rusher in Rodriguez. Meanwhile, 3 of our 4 captains are going to be playing in the game. Riley Moss included, of course, with Jack and with Sam. So we've got one opt-out of a significant player, and that would be Kayvon. And I'm sure it wasn't an easy decision for Kayvon, but it's a very personal decision that every player has to make. And we certainly wish Kayvon nothing but the best, because those guys were 4 outstanding captains. 3 of those 4 are going to be out there for the coin toss against Kentucky. And obviously the loss of Levis and Rodriguez is going to have a huge impact. I also just today heard about another guy, and I'll share this with you. Weak side linebacker DeAndre Square is not listed on the 2 deep. He was one of their best players this season. They even talked about him someday being in the Kentucky Hall of Fame as far as Kentucky football goes. And he's not on the 2 deep right now, and you might classify him as an opt-out. He did have a lower leg injury against Tennessee. He missed the next 3 games after Tennessee. Did play in Louisville. That was game 12. Had 3 total tackles, but maybe that lower leg injury is still fresh on his mind, and maybe he's an opt-out. I don't know, but he's not on the depth chart, and I think that's a good indication that he's not playing. Also, a boundary corner by the name of Carrington Valentine. He's an opt-out. They've got a couple of their best tight ends that are out with injury, so it's safe to say they're not deep at tight end. Quarterback, they identify all 3 of them as playing in the game. One of those, of course, is Deuce Hogan, but they also did state that Destin Wade will be the starter. And they mentioned, without even thinking twice about it, that he's maybe the best combination of run pass among those 3 quarterbacks. So that's the guy that we'll go up against to start the game. That's a quick update on their opt-outs and their injuries just from today.
And I don't know what the status of Terry Roberts is from an injury standpoint, but he and Dallas Craddock are the only 2 guys that are still listed on the Iowa roster. And I'm talking about the official roster that was released to the media for this bowl game. Roberts and Craddock are the only 2 guys that have entered the portal that remain on that roster. Terry Roberts is not on the 2 deep, Don. So that one's a little bit curious to me. Kirk was asked about Dallas, and he basically, I'm certainly not quoting Kirk, but in so many words, he basically referred back to Dallas's loyalty to the program, his stick-to-itiveness, especially with special teams, his leadership, which I appreciate. I've said to you privately, Don, on a number of occasions, I got a lot of respect for Dallas for sticking it out here as long as he has, being a 4-star guy, never really seeing the field very much, at least not on defense. So he is listed, but Justin Jacobs, who is committed to Oregon, has entered the portal, is committed to Oregon. Keegan Johnson, Arlen Bruce, who's not committed anywhere yet, Alex Padilla, Josh Volk, who's now committed to UNI. All those guys are off the roster. Should we assume that Terry is involved in bowl prep since he's on the roster?
Well, it is confusing because if he's healthy, then obviously he's in the 2 deep, if not in the starting lineup. He certainly at the very least would be a backup corner on our depth chart. The fact that he's not listed, maybe it's just an oversight that he remains on the roster. Terry clearly has indicated he wants to enter the transfer portal. As you know, that doesn't mean he's going to leave, but he's at least looking into his options, and it's kind of hard to imagine that he's not going to get some decent opportunity somewhere else. I'll be surprised if he doesn't, because I like Terry Roberts. To me, he's been a good player for us.
He's already got offers from Penn State, which is, he's from Erie, Pennsylvania. So, Penn State, Minnesota, he's got a lot. West Virginia, he's gotten a number of Power 5 offers already. So that one was kind of intriguing to me.
It is odd because, let's face it, the opt-outs might be put in the same classification as transfer portal guys. Let's face it, if you're planning on leaving Iowa and going somewhere else, let's just say Penn State as an example, the last thing you want to do is get injured in the bowl game. That's not going to help you. And let's face it, maybe somebody's not even committed to giving you a scholarship. Maybe put it this way, if you're Penn State and you're in contact with Terry Roberts, and Terry Roberts says, I want to be sure you guys are okay with me playing in the bowl game. It's not hard for me to imagine that Penn State might have a problem with that, because you don't want to get your guy injured in the bowl game. He's got him left anyway. The last thing you want to do is him suffer an injury. So in that regard, it's similar to the opt-outs that relate to the draft. You don't want to get your property damaged in a game that doesn't mean much. And it doesn't mean much simply because that particular player is going elsewhere.
You may have heard of the real-life Hawkeye man cave known as Kinnick Under the Kitchen. Well, after lots of hard work, there's not much space left to paint, but the walls are exploding out for public consumption. Under the Kitchen is proud to announce that you can now purchase exclusive prints of some of your favorite Hawkeye legends, including wrestling great Spencer Lee, football players Arlen Bruce, Riley Moss, and Tavian Banks, plus an all-in-one Murray family legacy print featuring Keegan, Chris, and Kenyon Murray himself. Signed and unsigned prints are available, making the perfect collectible or gift for any Hawkeye enthusiast. For more information on purchasing one of these outstanding Hawkeye prints, visit Under the Kitchen on Facebook. That's Under the Kitchen on Facebook. Don, before we're going to spend the last 35 minutes of this show or so talking specifics, I want to talk to you about analytics and some of the numbers that you have, maybe some of the biggest stats to follow, storylines to follow heading into this game on Saturday, which, by the way, I am excited about. We can talk about the matchup all we want, but it is intriguing to see some of these younger guys. We're going to get a good look at Kayvon Merriweather. And by the way, I should mention one other guy that's not mentioned on the roster that has entered the transfer portal is Reggie Bracey. He's another guy who has been listed on the two deeps at safety. So he is a DB who is in the portal and is not listed. So there is a discrepancy there. Again, the Terry Roberts situation kind of interesting. I want to ask you, Don, about the transfer portal and weighing what Iowa has lost, assuming the guys who are in the portal end up leaving, which I know it's not for certain. We know a few of those guys have already committed to other schools. Let's just assume for the sake of this conversation that all of these guys who have entered the portal are indeed leaving. Iowa has grabbed McNamara and Eric All. We know they're in on a couple of receivers, Seth Anderson being one from Charleston Southern, big-time transfer portal kid. And I say big time, he's only got one other Power 5 offer right now, and that's Georgia Tech, who just offered him a full scholarship. And then, of course, Isaac Tesla, who's wanted by a bunch of schools. He's a Hillsdale Division II college kid. My point is they've gotten two commitments to offset quite a number of guys who've entered the portal, several of which were contributors, heavy contributors, guys like Keegan, Arland, Justin, etc. There is this narrative out there, Don, that Iowa is going to at least break even, if not exceed, as far as total roster talent via the transfer portal. And I'll believe it when I see it. How do they do that? How do they find a way to just offset or even potentially improve their roster experience, depth, talent via the portal?
Well, based on what we know at this point, it's hard to imagine that anyone could classify it as a break-even proposition for us. Let's face it, those two receivers that are transferring out of here through the transfer portal, those guys came in with big reputations, and those guys played a lot of football for us, even as young receivers. And they were in big demand, of course, to go elsewhere. So it's kind of hard to imagine that we're going to be able to somehow say we upgraded ourselves at receiver. We lost two, but we brought in two. Nothing against those guys you mentioned that we're in contact with now, but it's kind of hard to imagine they project any better than the two we just lost.
Well, and the thing is that's why I brought that up, because there is this idea out there. Well, if Iowa can land Tesla and Anderson, and by the way, Don, I want them to land both those guys. They need to land those guys. But to your point, it's not like, people who say, well, Bruce and Johnson weren't producing anyways. Well, there's a reason why Keegan Johnson is going to Kansas State, had an opportunity to go to Notre Dame, had an opportunity to go to Nebraska. There's a reason why Arland Bruce was offered by Mississippi State and is probably going to go somewhere that's a Power 5. It's not like, we're sending guys back to the group of five and adding Power 5 receivers. So,
right, Corey, some of those guys some of those fans that are critical of the contribution that our young receivers made this past year, a year ago, they were critical of Charlie Jones too for his contribution. And I think, of course, Charlie had an incredible year with Purdue, and I'm happy for him that he was so well utilized and had such a productive season. So I don't think it's any secret. I'm sure that if entered into the minds of Arland Bruce and Keegan Johnson, maybe we can accomplish even more somewhere else. And that's fundamentally, I'm sure, why they're leaving.
Don, give me one player to watch for in this game. Maybe a dark horse candidate that, don't say Jack Campbell, somebody that maybe with opportunity, with extended opportunity that they're not maybe accustomed to seeing. Name somebody who you expect to maybe have a big impact on Saturday.
Well, I guess I'm being a little bit wishful here, but a guy that I do like in many ways is Deontay Vines. Okay. I think he's an intriguing guy, because he's got some length to him, and he's played some good football for us from time to time. I'll put it this way: either he or Brecht need to step up. One of those guys must step up, because we need production out of a wide receiver position. And I guess when you look at it in that regard, I'd like to think Joe Labus is going to be the biggest surprise of all because he's going to be involved with touching the ball every time he's on the field. And it would be nice if he relieved a lot of our anxiety at the quarterback position. That's a lot to ask, especially he's never taken a snap in a game, and he's facing a Kentucky defense that's pretty darn good. Now, I've already mentioned the weak side linebackers out, and he's one of their better players on defense. But their defensive stats are similar to ours, as you know. They're not as good as ours, but they're still very good. And it's kind of a crazy game because both defenses appear to be better than both offenses. And that's why you've heard me jokingly say first team to 10 wins. It might happen that way. I'll put it this way. I'd like to be the first team to 10 and then see what happens, because the first team to 10, that might not happen until sometime late in the second half. I don't know. We'll see. It's hard to predict how the score will play out, but safe to say it's not likely to be a high-scoring game.
I was hoping you were going to say that you don't think anybody will get to 10 until September, but you didn't say that. So
didn't say that.
One guy that I think fans ought to watch for, and I've said this before on the show, Jacob Bostic, freshman from Illinois, long. I mean, he's an athletic kid who hasn't really seen any time, looked really good in fall camp. I remember at Kids Day, he was a guy who stood out, number 15. He's got some athleticism, maybe Iowa receivers typically don't have. Was told a couple days ago that he has been taking snaps with the twos, which isn't really a story because just surely from a need standpoint, he's going to get snaps with the twos. But
maybe those are 11 personnel where you got three receivers out there at once.
Right. But it will be intriguing to see if he – and I'm also told that Jazz Patterson has been getting more carries in bowl prep, which makes sense too with Gavin Williams out. And he's a kid who I think the coaches are really high on. Caleb Johnson's obviously kind of stole the show in the backfield. Run game has, by all accounts, has looked decent in bowl prep, knock on wood. Again, the offense has struggled, but the run game has looked good. So I'm intrigued to see those young guys. People want to see Xavier Wampa. I understand that. I'm trying to think of other guys that you could potentially see at tight end. Maybe Steven Stilianos. I feel bad for him, Don. I don't know. I know we're just speculating on what's going to happen. But with bringing Eric All in, even with Laporta leaving, Stilianos came here from Lafayette last year, has 1 year left. You wonder, when is he going to get a shot? Is he going to get a shot? Will he re-enter the portal? It'd be interesting to see. I'd love to see a kid like that who moved across the country to play for this program, see some time, perhaps some valuable time against Kentucky. Let's shift to analytics, Don. You, of course, have been providing Kirk and his staff with analytics all season long, as you would do every year. But this is a little different when you're evaluating a team from a different conference like this. First of all, can you give our listeners an idea of how you approach analytics as it relates to a bowl team and the difference between that and matching up every team in the regular season?
You're right. It is different. Rather than looking at all kinds of games that are played in recent weekends, you simply zero in on these two teams that are playing in the bowl game. So in this case, I looked at all 9 conference games that involved Iowa. And then the SEC, as a lot of people don't know, but the SEC only plays 8 conference games. Well, I took those 8 conference games, and to that I added in a 9th game that made the most sense, and that would have been Louisville, which is game 12 for them. So I ended up with 18 games. And in terms of parameters, I looked at 24 different parameters, and I simply asked the question over and over again, who won the parameter? And did that team, in fact, win the game? Because you're looking to find parameters that are close to 100% reliable in identifying the winning team. And at that point, you can combine both teams to get a good idea of what matters the most. And I'm not going to give away the story, Corey, but I will give a little bit of a hint that comes to mind. This would be logical anyway, so I feel like I'm not giving away too many secrets. Would it be hard to imagine that the team that scores the first touchdown in the game doesn't have a great chance to win the game?
Yeah.
That would be true simply based on the scoring averages of these teams. That's a true statement. The team that does score the first touchdown wins a high percentage of the time. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but it's significant, I'll say that. And then right in there behind that percentage is a percentage relating to the team that won first quarter scoring. So the truth of it is, at the end of one quarter of play, the team that's ahead is very, very likely, if all those tendencies hold up, if all those analytics hold up, very, very likely to go on and win the game. Let's be sure we're that team. We need to start fast. We need to be aggressive with our play calling in the early stages of the game because a lead is significant. In part, of course, because both teams play good defense. So that's why I jokingly say the first team to 10 wins. That may be true. It might be the first team to a smaller number wins. But I'm assuming there'll be at least 20 or 30 points scored in the game, if only because somewhere in there, somebody's going to be given a short field. And I don't know much about their kicker, but I certainly like our kicker a lot, and so do you. If we're in the red zone, you can bet that we're very likely to come away with nothing less than a field goal because our kicker's that reliable.
The reason I was smiling, Don, is because you said you added Louisville as the last, the ninth team, part of the analytics for Kentucky. I figured that's why you wore the red turtleneck here today, is because you have just evaluated Louisville.
Hadn't thought of that.
Clear on where you stood. For the record, I know you have, go ahead, Don.
I was simply going to say there are other, just to give you an idea of how I look at these bowl games, and for that matter, I will do the same kind of evaluation for the national championship game. In that case, maybe I'll take, let's imagine it's two teams that are 14-0. That might be the case, right? We've got a couple of 13-0s right now that are going to be favored to win. So if they're both playing with a 14-0 record, I might look at all 28 games and see, because I guarantee you there might be a few parameters in there where Georgia has won 14 out of 14 cases, and for that matter, Michigan might have won that many too. So there will be some analytics that relate to a very accurate prediction on who wins the game. Whoever wins the parameter typically wins the game, and I'll work that up for the national championship game too. Incidentally, anybody that's interested, if you're a member of the Downtown Quarterback Club, I'm going to be presenting those analytics on lunch on the 9th, the day of the game. So that's something to look forward to. Giving you an idea of other things I do as I look at the game, Corey, I look strictly at Kentucky's games. They played 9 games according to my research, and there were a couple of parameters that were 100% win. I'm not going to tell you what they were. One of them was 8 wins and no losses. The other one was 6 wins and no losses. They're both 100% win. And obviously the one that was 6-0, that means there were 3 ties among 3 of those 9 games. So that one doesn't have quite the reliability of the other one that was 8-0 record. And then one other way I look at the game, I simply go back and I analyze, here are 5 teams that all beat Kentucky. In those 9 games, Kentucky's record was 4-5. So the obvious question, are there any parameters that all 5 teams have in common in the Kentucky? Here's the part that'll shock you. There were no less than 5 parameters in which that opposing team to Kentucky won every time. And I'm not going to tell you what they are, but I promise you this, Iowa football knows what they are. And the only question is, can we accomplish that? Can we win those same 5 parameters? If we do, I would say it all but guarantees a win. Because let's face it, if it's been successful 5 out of 5, and it's not easy to win those 5 parameters, but if you do it, you're certainly likely to win the game.
Let me just say this real quick. You asked about Kentucky's field goal kicker. He is quite the experienced kicker. He's in his 5th year. This year he went 16 of 24 for field goals, good for 67%. He was 25 of 27 on extra points made. So is that kind of, I'd say it's average, right? I mean, he's a 5th-year guy, right, but not the best in the country, certainly not Drew Stevens.
And you've heard me say before, Corey, if one kicker, let's just say for the sake of argument, one kicker over the season is 80% successful on field goals, the other one is 70. A lot of people might think that's not very different, but let's face it, one missed field goal could be the difference in the game. So, yes, it is significant. One guy only misses 20% of the time. The other guy misses 30% of the time. So, yes, that's significant in the difference of the 2 kickers. I like our chances. If it comes down to a game-winning field goal, let's imagine they both have a chance for a game-winning field goal. I like our chance of winning the game because our guy's not as likely to miss as theirs.
I agree. And I do want to mention this too. Let's not forget the weapon that Iowa has at punter and Torrey Taylor. In a game like this, just that how big is field position? I know I'm kind of just stating the obvious, but man, talk about a game that's every game is important for Iowa, controlling the field. But against this Kentucky team that plays very defense heavy, struggling on offense, and now without their two best weapons, the punt game is going to be huge in this game.
Yeah. Speaking specifically of average starting field position, this won't shock you. In the case of Iowa, the team that won on average starting field position won all 9 games. Every time it mattered. Now, in the case of Kentucky, not so. I don't mind talking about it. The team that won on average field position won 6 out of 9 times. So in that regard, it doesn't matter so much when you look at their side of the ledger, but when you look at our side of the ledger, it's critical. Matter of fact, it's 100%. So we need to win on field position. And the good news there, I'll be surprised if we don't win on field position, because our matchup, kicker versus kicker, punter versus punter, is better than theirs.
You know, take shots at Spencer Petras if you want. And I think a lot of the criticism towards him over the years, it has been justified. But I will say this, having a guy who's a 4th or 5th year senior back there in a game like this could prove to be valuable. And for Iowa, now you go from a guy who's uber experienced to a guy who's never taken a snap. I don't think maybe Labus has taken a snap at some point, but a meaningful snap, right? A meaningful snap in a game. As you know, 1 sack when you're in field goal range can prove to be. I mean, I've been watching all the bowl games here so far. I cannot tell you, Don, how many times I see a quarterback take a sack when you're in fringe field goal range. Just that understanding of time and place and time and space. That's one thing that does make me nervous with a guy like Labus out there who doesn't have the experience in those situations. Is he going to know what the right play is? I mean, normally as Iowa fans, you're talking about, why can't we have a guy who's making a big play in a big moment? But how about a guy that makes the safe play at the right time? And that's one thing you got to give Spencer Petras credit for 9 times out of 10.
Absolutely. Spencer did a good job protecting the ball, and that was critical to the way that we play football. No secret that we won on turnover margin this year, not to the extent that we did the year before, but the bottom line is we did a good job on offense protecting the ball. That's one of the best things we did as an offensive unit.
So, Don, give me some keys to this game. Where is this? We talked field position. We've talked certainly about the kicking game, which could prove to be big in a low-scoring affair. We've talked about maybe some depth issues on both sides. I'm intrigued to see what the receivers and the quarterbacks do, obviously. But where is this game won and where is this game lost?
Well, I think it's very critical. I'll put it this way. The team that gets off to a good start wins the game. The team that has an edge in first quarter scoring wins the game. The odds of that are very high. And again, I'm not going to tell you the exact number, but let's just say it's very important to win the first quarter. And the best way to do that, of course, is to start off by scoring the first down.
So you have the numbers, you have the analytics, and you're not going to share those with us. That's fine. You've got those to Kirk.
That's not fair to Iowa football.
Let me say this, Don. Regardless of what those numbers say, I'm going to go in a different place. My team in this game is turnovers. And I know you could say that in any game, right? But I've seen, again, I go back to some of these bowl games I've seen. And granted, some of the bowl games we've already observed here in the last week or two have been teams that are 6-6, 7-5. So there's a reason why they're 6-6 and not 10-2. But I think turnovers will be key here. You've got guys like Labus. I mean, I'll be shocked if Labus doesn't throw a pick or two in this game. And that might not be a bad thing. Perhaps he's more aggressive and in the end, it'll pay dividends. But with 2 quarterbacks who aren't very experienced, perhaps more than 2 quarterbacks, we could see up to 4 or 5 quarterbacks in this game. Don, you said earlier that you've read some information. I've been reading all the Kentucky writers out there, but it sounds like maybe Kentucky will play Deuce Hogan at times in this game. They've got 3 quarterbacks listed. And by the way, their depth chart has 3 guys listed as the starting quarterback. So you've got Kaya Sharon, I believe is how you pronounce his name, Destin Wade, and Deuce Hogan. Those guys are all listed as QB1. It sounds like maybe Wade is going to be the guy, Don, even though Sharon is the first guy listed here from what you've heard. Maybe it's going to be Wade. But my point is we're going to see a lot of different guys handling the ball. It's going to be exciting, but you're going to have growing pains in there. And my guess is you're going to see turnovers. And as you know, Don, turnovers can just completely change a ball game.
Yeah, you're right about that. Turnover margin, just to give you an idea, in our 9 games, the team that won turnover margin won 7 out of 8 times. Yeah. There was one game in there that was a tie. But it's kind of critical for us to be able to win the game. We need to win on turnovers. That's true. A little less of a factor in Kentucky's case. But again, it's not hard to imagine that their percentage is also well above 50%. It is. So it's kind of hard to imagine if you're +1 or more on turnovers, you probably found a way to win the game again. That's all true.
And Don, let's be honest. Through all these issues, all these struggles, I guess to put it kindly, on offense over the past couple of years at the minimum, the one constant for the most part, Iowa has still played winning football as a whole. And the offense, although the offense and the woes on offense have oftentimes been offset by the defense, by the special teams units, I think we can both agree, as bad as the offense has been, if it doesn't take care of the football, there's not enough defense in this. There's not enough Phil Parker defense in this world to offset a defense that can't move the ball and turns the ball over. That's the one thing you give Spencer Petras, all the offensive position coach, credit for, teaching their guys how to protect the football. And that is one thing that should make Iowa fans nervous in this game. When you have young guys, inexperienced guys, that's the one thing that's kept you afloat above water offensively, is the ability to protect that football.
Yeah, that's true. You've also heard me say this, and this is something to give Iowa fans more reason for optimism. A game is 3 games within one. You know, it's their offense versus our defense, their defense versus our offense, and then, of course, kicking game versus kicking game. And you've heard me say before, if you win 2 out of 3 matchups, you typically win the game. So often for us, the win for us has been in part because the defense won their matchup versus the offense. We won kicking game. 2 out of 3 gives you the win in most cases. Obviously, if the offense lost the game, if the defense performed better versus our offense, that doesn't guarantee that we're going to lose the football game. That's been proven not just this year, but last year as well. So let's win the kicking game. I'm confident we can do that. If we don't do it, we're in trouble. I'll say it that way, because that's something we should win based on looking at all the key personnel on both teams. If we can win that, if our defense can stymie their offense, then it's kind of hard to imagine we're going to lose. We're not going to lose unless the offense gives them a lot of short fields and gives them too many turnovers.
Well, Don, I appreciate the insight here today, and I'm looking forward to this game. I mean, when it was first announced, you're kind of thinking, oh, it's a game between 2 7-5 teams. The narrative out there that there's too many bowl games. I said this to you before we started. I've been enjoying all these bowl games because doing this show and operating this channel over the course of the last 2 years, I've watched less college football than I think I have since I was maybe a youngster. And it's just enjoyable to be able to watch these games. I'm looking forward to this one, just to see these younger guys, to be able to perhaps get a glimpse into the future. We don't know what Spencer Petras is going to do. I still don't think he's coming back, but that door has not been closed. If he doesn't, then there's a good chance that one of these 2 guys that we see on Saturday will end up being the backup behind Cade, which means they're 1 play away. So there's plenty of intriguing storylines. Anything that we didn't touch on that you want to add for people to watch during the game on Saturday?
Well, to those fans that wonder if it's going to be worth watching, I would suggest to them they should think of it as the first game in 2023. Let's face it, if we were opening in game 1 next September and we were in the exact same spot we're in now, there would be a lot of excitement about the game because people would wonder, how are these inexperienced quarterbacks going to perform? Not to mention other inexperienced players at other positions. So let's approach it that way. This is our first look at Joey Labus, our first look maybe at Carson May. We're looking at the future here, and I realize that McNamara is almost certain to be our starter next fall. But again, as you brought up, that means the backup is got to have the mentality that he's 1 play away from being in the game when it matters the most. And in that regard, either Joey or Carson may need to do something exciting on Saturday to get us all enthused, even more enthused about the future of Iowa football.
Iowa, Kentucky, folks, Music City Bowl, final game of the year, final game of the season, I should say. And, of course, later that same day, we'll have the national semifinals, the college football playoff beginning. But, of course, the game on Saturday, which will be televised on ABC at 11 a.m. Central Time, the Music City Bowl down in Nashville, it will be followed by this show, Iowa Postgame with Coach Don Patterson. And, Don, a year two of this show coming to a close. I've enjoyed it, but we've got one more to do, and let's hope we're talking about a win. 8-5 has a much better ring to it than 7-6, and I would have to imagine from a coach's perspective, you've been a part of a number of bowl games, being a former offensive coordinator, former offensive coach. It does give you a different type of momentum heading into the offseason, does it not?
Yeah, it does. And, one of my primary motivations to hope and pray that we're going to find a way to earn the win. I'm just thinking about those seniors that are playing their last game in our uniforms, and it obviously means the world to those players. You've got three guys in particular that are risking injury to play in their last game, and let's hope that they get rewarded not just with an outstanding individual performance on their part, but more important than that, they would gladly give that up as long as we earn the win as a team. So let's send Sam, and let's send Riley, and let's send, now I'm drawing a blank on who the third is. Oh, yeah, my gosh, Jack. I even know the jersey numbers well, but I'm here. Senior moment there, I apologize. Let's send Jack and Sam and Riley out with a win. Not just them, but all those other seniors that are playing their last game. That's one reason those three guys are coming back, is because they want to be sure their teammates leave Iowa football the right way too. And in that regard, I think we know this. We have a lot of key players that are playing their last game. And I think that gives us a definite edge, because I suspect we have more key players playing their last football game at Iowa than Kentucky has playing their last game at Kentucky. So advantage Iowa.
Iowa, Kentucky on Saturday, folks, to be followed by Iowa postgame with Coach Don Patterson right here, live, taking your calls, taking your chats, taking your comments. Final game of the season. Don't miss it. Hopefully we're talking about a Music City Bowl win. Coach Patterson, as always enjoy your insight, and we'll look forward to more insight following an Iowa win on Saturday.
My pleasure, Corey. Thanks for the time.